Let's begin. Number 1. A marriage made of strategy, not love. Imagine being forced into a marriage where love is the last thing anyone cares about. That was Sophia Dorothea of Cell's fate. She was married off to George Louis of Hanover, the man who would later become King George I of Britain in 1682. This wasn't a fairy tale wedding, it was a political chess move. Sophia was wealthy and beautiful, George was power-hungry and ambitious. Their union united two German houses, brought a dowry of nearly 1 million thalers, and made everyone in the family clap their hands in financial relief. The problem? George and Sophia Dorothea hated each other. From the very beginning, the marriage was described as loveless and volatile. George was reportedly cold, controlling, and uninterested in his wife. Sophia, meanwhile, was fiery, passionate, and unwilling to be treated like an ornament. That combination? About as stable as a powder keg sitting next to a torch. George spent his nights with mistresses and gave Sophia no affection. Sophia retaliated with sharp words and a refusal to play the obedient wife. In a court obsessed with appearances, their mutual disdain became the talk of Hanover. Everyone could see the cracks forming in the royal marriage, and those cracks were about to widen into a scandal. The historical takeaway here is simple. Royal marriages weren't about love, they were business deals. Sophia Dorothea was essentially the dowry, George was the investor, and their marriage was the merger. The difference? Unlike modern corporate mergers, there was no way out. Unless, of course, you committed adultery and sparked one of the biggest scandals of the 17th century. Number 2. Enter the Swedish knight. Some people escape bad marriages with therapy. Sophia Dorothea tried to escape hers with a Swedish knight. Enter Count Philip Christoph von Königsmarck, a dashing, adventurous soldier whose charisma lit up Hanoverian court like a candle in a dungeon. He was everything George wasn't. Young, charming, exciting, and most importantly, he actually paid attention to her. It didn't take long before rumors began swirling. Letters passed secretly between Sophia and Königsmarck, dripping with passion and desperation. Historians have recovered some of these love letters, and they read like a soap opera, full of yearning, rebellion, and dangerous promises. Of course, in the world of monarchies, adultery wasn't just about broken vows, it was political dynamite. If the wife of the heir to the Hanoverian throne was sleeping around, it cast doubt on the legitimacy of heirs, insulted powerful families, and risked destabilizing alliances. Basically, Sophia and Königsmarck weren't just sneaking kisses, they were playing with fire that could burn down dynasties. But like every royal scandal, this one didn't stay secret for long. By 1694, their affair was more or less an open secret at court. And when you mix gossip, power, and betrayal in a royal court, someone is always going to end up dead. Number 3. The disappearance that shocked Europe. July 1694. Königsmarck was summoned to a secret meeting at the Hanoverian palace. He thought he was walking into a plan for elopement with Sophia Dorothea. Instead, he walked straight into a trap. After that night, Königsmarck was never seen again. Most historians believe George, or at least his father, Ernest Augustus, had the Swedish knight murdered to protect the family's honor. Theories suggest Königsmarck was hacked to pieces and dumped in the Lena River or buried under the palace floorboards. There's no confirmed body, just whispers and bloodstains in history. For Sophia, the disappearance of her lover wasn't just tragic, it was the end of her freedom. With Königsmarck gone, George and his family now had the perfect excuse to lock Sophia away. They accused her of adultery, annulled her marriage, stripped her of her titles, and imprisoned her for the rest of her life. Think about it. One moment you're a crown princess with love letters hidden in your bodice, the next you're staring at the four walls of a prison cell. The Hanoverian dynasty made sure that Sophia Dorothea never set foot in public life again. Her name was erased, her reputation shredded, her life turned into a cautionary tale. Basically, George didn't just silence his wife, he buried her alive in history. Number 4. Life in a gilded cage. Imagine spending over 30 years locked away, not in a dungeon, but in a manor house that became your prison. That was Sophia Dorothea's fate. After her affair and Königsmarck's mysterious disappearance, she was confined to the castle of Alden in northern Germany. From 1694 until her death in 1726, she never set foot outside. On paper, her imprisonment might look comfortable. She had servants, fine clothes, and enough space to pace out her frustrations. But make no mistake, it was a gilded cage. Letters to her children were intercepted, visitors strictly controlled, and any attempt at communication beyond her prison walls was squashed. It was less country estate and more velvet coffin. George made absolutely sure his disgraced wife remained erased from polite society. She was never allowed to attend court again. When she died, he even forbade their children, future King George II of Britain included, from attending her funeral. Talk about cold. The irony? George lived his own life like a free man, taking mistresses openly while Sophia sat trapped. Her prison wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. The message was clear. Betray a king, and you don't just lose your crown, you lose your identity. Number 5. George becomes King of Britain. Fast forward to 1714. Queen Anne of England dies without surviving heirs, and the throne suddenly needs a Protestant successor. Thanks to the tangled web of succession laws, George Louis of Hanover, the same George who had locked away his wife decades earlier, was next in line. He became King George I of Great Britain, the first monarch of the Hanoverian dynasty. Imagine the irony. George traveled to Britain, was crowned in Westminster Abbey, and became ruler of one of the most powerful kingdoms in the world, all while his wife sat imprisoned back in Germany. The King of Great Britain, ladies and gentlemen, was also the man who personally ensured his wife rotted in exile. But George's reputation wasn't exactly sparkling. He spoke little English, preferred Hanover to London, and was seen by many Britons as a foreign ruler foisted upon them. His treatment of Sophia Dorothea only fueled the whispers. Some English courtiers pitied her, painting her as a tragic victim. Others saw her as a reckless adulteress who brought her fate upon herself, deepening the public's disdain for King George. The takeaway? Even as George wore Britain's crown, his darkest scandal, his wife's imprisonment and Königsmarck's murder, shadowed his reign. Power might erase enemies, but it never erases gossip. Number 6. Children torn between parents. Now picture being the child in this twisted royal soap opera. George and Sophia Dorothea had 2 children, George Augustus, who would later become George II of Britain, and Sophia Dorothea of Hanover, who married into the Prussian royal family. Both children were forcibly separated from their mother after her imprisonment. Growing up without their mother left scars. George Augustus reportedly despised his father, and his relationship with George I became one of the most bitter father-son rivalries in royal history. Historians often argue that part of the reason George II clashed so hard with his father was because he blamed him for erasing his mother. When George II eventually took the throne, he made quiet but symbolic gestures to honor his mother's memory, though the wound never truly healed. It's a reminder that royal politics didn't just ruin marriages, it ripped families apart. For the Hanoverian dynasty, love was collateral damage in the endless pursuit of power and respectability. In other words, when your crown is secured by imprisoning your wife and murdering her lover, do not expect your kids to write you a sweet Father's Day card. Number 7. The murder nobody admitted to. Let's be blunt. Everyone at court knew what happened to Count Königsmarck. You don't just vanish after walking into a palace. Historians believe he was ambushed, killed, and his body disposed of with surgical precision. Some accounts suggest his remains were hidden under the Linischloss Palace in Hanover. Others say they were dumped in the river. Here's the kicker. Everyone pretended not to know. George never admitted to ordering the murder. His father, Ernest Augustus, stayed silent, and the courtiers who whispered the truth lived in fear of being next. It was the kind of open secret that defines royal courts. People knew, but no one dared to say it aloud. Königsmarck's disappearance was Europe's royal horror story of the day. A dashing young nobleman, cut down in the prime of life, erased by a dynasty terrified of shame. The silence around his fate wasn't just political, it was calculated psychological warfare. By ensuring his body was never found, George and his family robbed Sophia Dorothea of closure. It was like saying, "We won't just take him from you, we'll take even the memory of him." This wasn't just a personal scandal. It became a chilling reminder of how absolute monarchies operated. Royals weren't accountable to law, morality, or even basic decency. They were accountable only to power. Number 8. Sophia Dorothea's endless isolation. By the early 1700s, Sophia Dorothea's world had shrunk to the walls of Alden House. Reports from servants describe her as bitter, sharp-tongued, and still clinging to the belief that she would one day be released. She never was. Her children weren't allowed to see her, and her pleas for freedom were ignored year after year. She filled her time with embroidery, correspondence, most of which was censored or destroyed, and staring out of windows at a world she would never rejoin. The tragedy here isn't just that she was imprisoned, it's that she lived for decades in the half-life of someone technically alive, but politically and socially dead. And remember, she was the mother of Britain's future king. Imagine growing up knowing your father locked away your mother for life. For George I, it was about protecting the dynasty. For Sophia, it was a slow death sentence. Her story was whispered in Britain, fueling the public suspicion of George I. The British already thought their new king was aloof and foreign. Add in the rumor that he had essentially buried his wife alive, and you can see why George never became the darling of his subjects. Number 9. The Queen Who Never Was. Here's the cruelest twist of all. Had Sophia Dorothea stayed married and scandal-free, she would have become Queen of Great Britain. Imagine it. Instead of dying a prisoner in Germany, she could have walked in coronation robes through Westminster Abbey, sitting beside George I on the throne. But history doesn't deal in what-ifs. Instead, she became a ghost queen. Her name was wiped from official genealogies, her memory locked away just like her body. When she died in 1726, just 2 years before George himself, her death barely caused a ripple at court. Her former husband forbade any official mourning. No grand funerals, no monuments, not even her children allowed to honor her properly. In the end, Sophia Dorothea was erased. She became the cautionary tale whispered in palace corridors, the woman who dared to love and paid with a lifetime of silence. The historical takeaway is brutal but clear. Royalty offered unimaginable privilege, but it also demanded absolute obedience. Step out of line and you weren't just punished, you were annihilated from history. Number 10. George I's haunted legacy. When George I died in 1727, his reign left behind more whispers than triumphs. Yes, he secured the Hanoverian dynasty on the British throne, but he never shook off the image of being the cold foreign king who barely tolerated England and who had locked away his wife until the day she died. In fact, legend claims that on his way back to Hanover, George suffered a stroke and died in the very place where Königsmarck had vanished decades earlier. Poetic justice? Some certainly thought so. It's as if history itself circled back to remind him of the skeletons under his palace floorboards. George's legacy was marked by political shifts. Parliament grew stronger and the monarchy weaker. But personally, he became remembered as the king with blood on his hands and a wife in a cage. His dynasty survived, but his reputation never recovered. Number 11. The mother who shaped a dynasty in absence. Here's the irony. While George ruled Britain, Sophia Dorothea shaped it from her prison, not by action, but by absence. Her son, George II, carried the scars of her erasure for the rest of his life. His bitter feud with his father, his relentless stubbornness, and his determination to define his reign differently. All of it stemmed, at least in part, from watching his mother locked away. Sophia Dorothea may never have worn Britain's crown, but her story shaped the Hanoverian line. She became the ghost that haunted the dynasty. Every time George I stood in court, people whispered about the wife he'd hidden. Every time George II defied his father, Sophia's shadow loomed in the background. It's a reminder that power doesn't just belong to those on the throne. Sometimes the erased, the silenced, the forgotten shape history in ways no crown ever can. So what do we take away from this royal horror story? That monarchies aren't just about glittering crowns and gilded carriages. They're about survival at all costs, where a scandal can end not just a marriage, but a life. Sophia Dorothea's tragedy is a case study in the cruelty of dynastic politics. Her love affair wasn't just an affair, it was treason to a system obsessed with bloodlines and appearances. Basically, George I proved that imprisoning your wife might secure your throne, but it destroys your legacy. He wore Britain's crown, but history remembers him less as a king and more as the man who buried his wife alive in a castle. And Sophia Dorothea, she may not have been crowned, but her story has outlived the man who tried to erase her. So yeah, George got the crown, but at the cost of his humanity. Which just goes to show, royalty is basically a high-stakes soap opera where the writers never run out of cruelty. Subscribe before your family drama ends up in a history book.